Welcome to Earth, Analyst, a place where the story of our planet unfolds softly, layer by layer, like pages in a book written across deep time. Tonight, we journey back more than 65 million years into an age when Earth was warmer, seas stretched across continents, and giant creatures roamed the land, the skies, and the oceans. During the Cretaceous Period, Earth was a world transformed, a planet bathed in warmth where the continents drifted slowly toward the shapes we recognize today but had not yet fully formed into the familiar map of our modern world. The land masses were split into fragments, seas crept inland and created shallow oceans, and lush forests thrived where today deserts might lie. Imagine a time when giant reptiles ruled the land, when flowering plants were beginning to spread across fields and valleys, when the skies echoed with the cries of enormous flying reptiles, and when mammals were still small and hidden, living in the shadows of giants. The atmosphere carried more carbon dioxide than today. The climate was humid, and tropical conditions extended further toward the poles, allowing life to flourish in places that are cold and barren in our time. It was a world of extremes, yet also a world of balance, where ecosystems reached a peak of complexity that would soon be tested by one of the greatest extinctions Earth would ever know. To walk through a forest of the Cretaceous would have been to step into a living cathedral of green, where conifers and cycads stretched skyward, joined now by the earliest true flowering plants that added new colors and fragrances to the air. Insects buzzed among these blossoms, the ancestors of bees and butterflies, beginning relationships with plants that would change the course of evolution forever. Dinosaurs wandered among these groves, their massive forms brushing against branches, their feet pressing deep impressions into the soil. Rivers ran wide and lazy, filling marshes where crocodiles and turtles thrived, while dragonflies with shimmering wings darted above the surface. The air was heavy with humidity, warm even in regions that now lie close to the poles, a reminder that this was a greenhouse Earth, free of ice caps, with oceans swelling high upon the continents. It was not a quiet world, but for those drifting into sleep. Imagining it brings a deep sense of calm, a planet alive with growth, stability, and the endless hum of nature above these forests. The skies were alive with movement, as enormous pterosaurs soared with wingspans greater than any bird today, catching thermal currents and gliding effortlessly from sea to land. Some skimmed the waters, their long beaks snapping at fish, while others nested in cliffs or sandy shores, their cries echoing across lagoons. Early birds, descendants of small feathered dinosaurs, flitted among branches and took tentative control of the skies, experimenting with flight in forms both awkward and graceful. Clouds drifted slowly across vast skies, tinted by the golden light of a sun that shone slightly dimmer than today, but bathed the earth in warmth nonetheless. Storms rolled across oceans, feeding the water cycle that nourished forests and plains. Night brought a moonlit calm, with shadows of towering dinosaurs stretching across meadows where cicadas and crickets sang in ancient rhythms. It was a symphony of life, an orchestra tuned not for human ears, but for the endless dance of survival, adaptation, and beauty that marked the Cretaceous world. The oceans of the Cretaceous were worlds unto themselves, vast, deep, and filled with creatures that seemed as though they had been crafted from dreams and nightmares alike. Shallow seas covered much of the continents, transforming what is now North America into a land split in two by a great inland ocean. These waters were warm, teeming with plankton that fed countless fish, ammonites, and marine reptiles. Imagine diving beneath the waves and encountering mosasaurs, giant predators with elongated bodies, jaws lined with sharp teeth, and eyes that gleamed with ancient awareness. Ichthyosaurs had mostly vanished, but plesiosaurs, with their long necks or broad bodies, swam gracefully through these seas. Schools of fish shimmered like silver ribbons, scattering as predators surged among them. Life beneath the surface was just as complex, just as vivid as that upon land, and the oceans echoed with the same timeless rhythms of feeding, hunting, and survival. Coral reefs flourished during this era, vibrant with color and buzzing with activity, as if they were the bustling cities of the sea. Brightly shelled mollusks clustered among branching corals, sponges filtered the waters, and countless small creatures found shelter in the nooks and crevices of these undersea gardens. Sharks, already ancient by this time, prowled among them, their sleek bodies moving silently as they hunted. The seas were rich with nutrients, supporting vast chains of life that stretched from microscopic plankton to the largest marine reptiles. The water was warmer than modern oceans, and the circulation patterns were different, meaning the deep seas often lacked oxygen in certain regions, creating pockets where only the hardiest organisms could survive. Yet, for all its dangers, the marine world of the Cretaceous was one of dazzling diversity, a realm that added immeasurably to the richness of Earth's story. At the surface, the oceans reflected skies filled with drifting clouds, sunlight breaking through in shimmering beams that danced across the waves. Pterosaurs skimmed the surface, their shadows fleeting as they dipped to catch fish, while far out at sea, giant reptiles broke the surface to breathe, their movements sending ripples across the calm expanse. Storms would gather suddenly, sweeping across open waters with rain and lightning. But life adapted to these cycles, thriving in the constant change. The scent of salt, the endless crash of waves, and the ceaseless rhythm of tides created a soundtrack to this watery world. And beneath it all, life continued in abundance, forming a hidden foundation for everything that walked, flew, or crawled upon land. As we drift into dreams, we can imagine ourselves floating upon these primeval seas, rocked gently by waves that carried the heartbeat of a world very different, yet also strangely familiar to the one we know today. The climate of the Cretaceous was unlike anything we experience today, a greenhouse Earth without permanent polar ice caps, where warmth reached far into regions that are now cold and desolate. Temperatures were higher across the globe. This meant lush vegetation could grow at high latitudes, creating forests where today we find only tundra and ice. Rainfall patterns were different too, with humid conditions spreading across much of the planet and deserts shrinking under the influence of abundant moisture. It was a time when the Earth's atmosphere held more carbon dioxide, thickening the blanket that trapped heat and distributed it widely, shaping ecosystems that thrived under conditions we would find almost unrecognizable for creatures that lived then. However, this was the natural order, a balance that allowed dinosaurs and countless other species to flourish in vast numbers. The skies of this era carried clouds, swollen with water vapor, drifting lazily across lands covered with greenery. Tropical storms swept across shallow seas, their winds reshaping coastlines and pushing sediments into fertile plains. Thunder echoed through valleys where enormous herbivores grazed undisturbed, lifting their heads only briefly to acknowledge the distant rumbles of nature's power. At night, when the heat of the day faded slightly, the air remained heavy with humidity, and the scents of blooming flowers mixed with the earthy fragrance of damp soil. Lightning illuminated the silhouettes of towering sauropods moving through groves of conifers, their long necks reaching upward to pluck tender leaves, while smaller dinosaurs scurried in their shadow. The balance between calm and chaos defined this world, making the climate both nurturing and demanding, always pushing life to adapt in countless ways. If one could have stood at the poles during the Cretaceous, the sight would have been astonishingly different from today. Instead of endless expanses of ice and snow, dense forests of conifers, ginkgos, and flowering plants stretched for miles, bathed in long days of sunlight during the summer months. Dinosaurs wandered these polar forests, enduring months of darkness in the winter, but thriving on the abundance of food available in the bright seasons. The temperatures, while cooler than at the equator, were still far milder than modern polar conditions, allowing reptiles, amphibians, and insects to thrive. Fossil evidence even shows that some dinosaurs may have developed unique adaptations for surviving these prolonged periods of twilight, perhaps slowing their metabolism or finding shelter during the coldest stretches. It was a world without frostbitten silence, but instead one where the rhythm of the seasons painted life in vibrant, enduring patterns. The plant life of the Cretaceous marked a turning point in Earth's history, for it was in this era that flowering plants, the angiosperms, rose to prominence, forever reshaping the landscape. Before their arrival, forests had been dominated by conifers, cycads, and ferns, towering green cathedrals that had stood for millions of years. But slowly, quietly, flowers began to spread, their colors and fragrances drawing insects into partnerships that would shape the course of evolution. These plants developed fruits and seeds that could be carried by animals, spreading their kind across great distances. They competed fiercely with older plant groups, and over time, they began to dominate ecosystems, providing new sources of food and shelter for creatures both large and small. The Cretaceous Earth was thus a tapestry of green punctuated by bursts of vivid color, a sign that change was underway, even in a world that seemed timeless. Forests during this era were dense and varied, with towering conifers stretching high above, their needle-like leaves whispering in the wind, while beneath them flowering shrubs and low ferns carpeted the ground. Rivers cut winding paths through these forests, creating fertile valleys where vegetation grew in almost impenetrable thickets. Insects, newly adapted to pollinate flowers, flitted among blossoms, carrying pollen from plant to plant in a delicate dance that ensured the survival of entire species. Larger animals pushed through these forests too, creating paths that became trails for countless smaller creatures. The interplay between plant and animal life grew ever more complex, weaving a web of interdependence that made these ecosystems remarkably resilient. It was a world in bloom, both literally and figuratively, setting the stage for all the diversity of plant life that would follow to walk through. Such a forest would have been to enter a world both alien and familiar. You would hear the rustle of leaves above as a massive dinosaur moved through the canopy, the buzzing of insects that had only just begun to develop the complex roles they played today, and the occasional snap of a branch as something far larger than yourself passed by. The air would be thick with the scent of resin, flowers, and damp earth. Bright petals would peek from beneath green leaves, drawing your eyes to spots of color amidst the otherwise deep forest tones. Ferns brushed at your legs, while dragonflies and beetles skittered past in flashes of movement. And everywhere, life thrived in its countless forms, all woven together by the silent partnership between plants and the creatures that relied on them. The dinosaur fauna of the Cretaceous reached a peak in diversity, filling every niche across land, water, and even sky. Mighty predators stalked vast herds of herbivores, while smaller species carved out specialized ways of life in forests, plains, and wetlands. It was an age of giants, with creatures like Tyrannosaurus rex dominating the apex predator role in North America, while Spinosaurus ruled river systems in Africa, its long jaws snapping at fish beneath the water's surface. Herbivores, from the enormous Argentinosaurus to the horned Triceratops, thrived in equally vast numbers, their sheer size and strength ensuring that plants were constantly grazed, reshaped, and renewed. Each continent had its own distinctive mix of dinosaurs, reflecting the slow drift of tectonic plates and the isolation of evolving ecosystems. Together, they formed a living panorama of power, grace, and adaptability unmatched in Earth's history. The relationships between predator and prey were delicate dances of survival, played out daily across sweeping plains and dense forests. Carnivores relied on speed, cunning, or brute strength to capture their meals, while herbivores developed defenses ranging from armor and horns to sheer numbers in vast herds. A pack of raptors could bring down prey far larger than themselves through cooperation, while lone giants like Tyrannosaurus stalked silently, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every encounter was a test of endurance and instinct, ensuring that only the strongest or cleverest survived to pass on their lineage. The drama of life and death played out endlessly, unseen by human eyes, yet leaving behind fossilized bones and footprints that whisper to us across millions of years. But not all dinosaurs lived in these brutal cycles of predator and prey. Some species formed communities, nesting together and raising their young in colonies that offered protection in numbers. Fossil evidence reveals sites where dozens of nests once lay side by side, each filled with fragile eggs that represented the hope of the next generation. Parents may have guarded these nests, shading them with their massive bodies, or turning eggs carefully with claws. Hatchlings would emerge, vulnerable and small, relying on the protection of their herd until they could fend for themselves. These behaviors remind us that life during the Cretaceous was not only about power, but also about care, cooperation, and the quiet rhythms of family. The skies of the Cretaceous were alive with creatures unlike anything we see today, where pterosaurs soared effortlessly on wings stretched wide, riding thermal currents across coastlines, plains, and inland seas. These flying reptiles came in countless shapes and sizes, from the small, bird-like Aneurognathus that fluttered through forests at dusk, to the colossal Quetzalcoatlus, whose wingspan rivaled that of a small airplane. Their bodies were covered in pycnofibers, hair-like structures that offered insulation, helping them maintain body temperature in a warm but fluctuating climate. With beaks adapted for different diets, some pterosaurs snatched fish from waves, while others probed mudflats or hunted small prey in grassy meadows. To see them overhead would have been to watch a living ballet of wings and shadows, each flight path weaving a silent story against the backdrop of ancient skies. At dawn, flocks of smaller pterosaurs would take to the air in search of food, their wings beating steadily as they rose above misty rivers. Larger species preferred to wait for the warming of midday, when rising columns of heated air allowed them to glide for hours with little effort, conserving energy while searching for prey or nesting grounds. Along coastal cliffs, colonies nested in groups, the cries of adults mixing with the shrill calls of chicks demanding food. Fossilized footprints and wing impressions suggest that some pterosaurs could walk awkwardly on land, folding their wings and moving with surprising agility to reach food sources. The skies themselves were a habitat, one that supported countless species that had adapted uniquely to life above the ground. When night fell, the skies did not grow silent, but shifted into another rhythm. Smaller, insect-eating pterosaurs may have hunted in the twilight, darting through clouds of moths and beetles that filled the warm air. Stars burned brightly in skies free of human light, their reflections shimmering on wide inland seas. Bats did not yet exist, but these ancient flyers filled similar roles, testing strategies of aerial hunting that would later be refined by mammals. The moon rose over forests, alive with sound, and the silhouettes of giant wings crossed the pale glow, momentarily blotting out the light before vanishing into darkness. For those who lived in this era, the sky was not merely an expanse above, but a vibrant, living world, as filled with diversity and drama as the oceans or forests below. While pterosaurs ruled the open skies, birds were beginning to take their first confident steps into true flight, evolving from small feathered dinosaurs into forms more familiar to us today. Their feathers, once used for insulation and display, had become specialized for flight, enabling them to glide, flap, and maneuver with increasing efficiency. Some early birds still bore teeth in their beaks and claws upon their wings, remnants of their dinosaur ancestry. Yet their skeletons grew lighter, and their wings more refined. They nested in trees, built homes for their young, and filled ecological niches that would eventually allow them to thrive after the extinction of their reptilian cousins. The Cretaceous skies were thus shared between two great lineages, one destined to vanish, the other to endure and become the dominant flyers of the modern world. Though primitive compared to the melodies we know today, may have echoed through forests, blending with the buzzing of insects and the distant calls of dinosaurs. Insects swarmed around blossoms, providing endless food for these agile flyers who darted among branches and shrubs. Fossilized feathers preserved in amber reveal astonishing colors and patterns, suggesting that even in this early stage, Birds displayed a variety of plumage for camouflage, communication, and attraction. They were small compared to the towering giants that roamed below, but their adaptability and ability to occupy safe perches gave them a resilience that would serve them well in the ages to come. At night, some birds may have sought safety in numbers, roosting together in hidden groves, while others relied on camouflage to blend into the foliage. Their eggs were laid in carefully hidden nests, guarded by parents who risked much to ensure their offspring survived. These behaviors remind us that the seeds of modern bird life were already being sown in the Cretaceous, shaping lineages that would outlast even the mightiest dinosaurs. Their presence added another layer of richness to ecosystems already bursting with life, showing that evolution never rests but constantly seeks new paths, new forms, and new possibilities. In the wetlands and rivers of the Cretaceous, crocodiles and turtles thrived. Ancient survivors whose lineage stretched back millions of years before and would continue millions of years after. Crocodiles grew to enormous sizes, some species reaching lengths far greater than any alive today. Lurking in the murky waters with jaws powerful enough to crush bone, they were ambush predators waiting patiently beneath the surface for prey to approach before lunging with terrifying speed. Turtles, too, reached astonishing sizes, their shells wide and sturdy, protecting them from all but the most determined attackers. Together, they ruled the waterways, sharing space with fish, amphibians, and the occasional thirsty dinosaur that dared to approach the water's edge. The rivers themselves were lifelines, winding through plains and forests, carrying nutrients that sustained entire ecosystems. Their banks were muddy and rich with vegetation, offering shelter to countless smaller creatures who lived in burrows or nested nearby. Frogs croaked from shaded pools, while insects skimmed across the water's surface, their ripples betraying their presence to hungry predators. When floods came, they reshaped the land, carving new channels and leaving behind fertile soil where plants flourished. Life along these waterways was vibrant, ever-changing, and deeply interconnected, with each creature playing a part in maintaining the balance. On warm nights, the rivers came alive with sound, the calls of amphibians, the splashing of fish breaking the surface, and the occasional bellow of a massive crocodile echoing across the valley. Fireflies may have drifted above the reeds, their lights blinking like stars reflected in water, while herds of dinosaurs gathered to drink under the cover of darkness. These riparian landscapes were places of abundance, danger, and constant renewal. They were the arteries of the Cretaceous world, pulsing with life and energy, sustaining creatures both mighty and small, ensuring that the planet's story continued to flow unbroken. The insects of the Cretaceous played roles both subtle and profound, buzzing tirelessly through forests, grasslands, and wetlands, weaving connections that tied the living world together. With the rise of flowering plants, insects entered into new relationships, carrying pollen from blossom to blossom, ensuring reproduction and fueling the spread of angiosperms across continents. Beetles, ants, wasps, and early bees darted tirelessly, while butterflies in primitive forms began to appear, their delicate wings painted in colors that mirrored the petals they visited. Dragonflies, relics of an older age, still ruled ponds and rivers, darting with precision in pursuit of prey. The air was alive with their hum, a constant reminder that even the smallest creatures were shaping the future of Earth in quiet, enduring ways. Amber, fossilized tree resin, has preserved countless snapshots of this era, trapping insects mid-flight, mid-bite, or mid-rest. From these golden relics, we glimpse the delicate details of ancient wings, compound eyes, and even grains of pollen clinging to their legs. These small windows into the past reveal that many insects of the Cretaceous look remarkably familiar to us, showing how successful their forms have been across deep time. They were tireless workers, feeding on nectar, scavenging from carcasses, and recycling nutrients back into the soil. Without them, the flowering plants would not have flourished, and without flowering plants, countless other creatures would have struggled to survive. As night fell, the insect chorus shifted. Crickets sang their rhythmic songs beneath leaves. Cicadas buzzed in waves of sound that rose and fell like the breath of the forest, and moths swirled around blossoms that opened only in darkness. Spiders spun webs in silence, catching prey that wandered too close to their sticky strands. This nightly performance was as essential to the ecosystem as the great herds of dinosaurs or the soaring pterosaurs above. Insects may have been small, but in their countless billions, they sustained the great engines of life during the Cretaceous, just as they continue to do today. Beneath the ground of the Cretaceous, another world thrived unseen, a realm of roots, fungi, and soil teeming with microscopic life. Plant roots burrowed deep into the earth, drawing water and nutrients while stabilizing the landscape against floods and erosion. Mycorrhizal fungi formed intricate partnerships with these roots, trading minerals for sugars, creating networks that linked trees and plants into hidden communities. Bacteria and tiny invertebrates worked tirelessly, breaking down fallen leaves and dead organisms, recycling their matter back into the soil. This unseen engine powered the forests above, ensuring that nutrients never disappeared but instead cycled endlessly, fueling new growth and sustaining entire ecosystems. Burrowing creatures like early mammals, lizards, and small dinosaurs carved tunnels through the soil, creating safe havens away from predators and harsh weather. Their hidden homes became ecosystems in miniature, filled with stored food, hatchlings, and warmth. Fossil evidence shows that some mammals of this era lived almost entirely underground, venturing out only to forage under cover of darkness, avoiding the eyes of larger predators. The soil itself carried the memory of every season, layer upon layer of sediment recording floods, fires, and droughts in a language that scientists would one day learn to read. On the surface, the results of this hidden work were everywhere. Lush meadows, towering trees, and dense undergrowth all owed their vigor to the quiet activity beneath their roots. Without this subterranean world, the grandeur of the Cretaceous landscape could never have existed. Though invisible to the eye, it formed the foundation of life, a silent partner in the grand play of evolution. As we imagine drifting to sleep, we can picture this underground world humming softly, a heartbeat beneath the earth that kept the planet alive, steady. An ever-renewing volcanoes shaped the Cretaceous landscape with fire and ash, sculpting mountains, feeding soils, and at times unleashing destruction upon the creatures that lived nearby. Tectonic plates were in constant motion, spreading the continents apart and raising new ranges as they collided. Volcanic eruptions poured molten rock across plains, while ash clouds rose high into the atmosphere, shading the sun and briefly cooling the world. Yet, even in destruction, volcanoes offered renewal, for the ash carried minerals that enriched the soil, creating fertile ground where plants flourished once the land cooled. This cycle of fire and rebirth wove itself into the story of the Earth, ensuring that no landscape remained static, but always shifted, grew, and transformed. The air near volcanic regions was heavy with the scent of sulfur, while rivers of lava glowed red against darkened skies, their heat radiating across the land. Forests could be swept away in an instant, creatures fleeing as ash rained down and darkness swallowed daylight. Fossil beds sometimes preserve entire communities buried in these moments, frozen snapshots of life caught unaware by nature's fury. Yet only a few years later, new greenery would push through the blackened rock, flowers blooming in soils enriched by minerals released from deep within the planet. Volcanoes were both destroyers and creators, powers that shaped the destiny of landscapes and the survival of countless species at night. These fiery mountains glowed like beacons, their lava flows painting the land with rivers of light, while stars glittered above in contrast to the violence below. Herds of dinosaurs might have wandered cautiously across cooled fields, feeding on the fresh plants that grew in volcanic ash. Pterosaurs circled in the distance, their silhouettes framed against the glowing horizon. In this world, fire was as natural as rain, part of a rhythm that alternated between chaos and calm. To imagine this is to drift into a dreamscape of contrasts, of blazing heat and quiet renewal, of endings that always led to beginnings, of Earth itself reshaping its surface again and again. The seas of the Cretaceous were not only rich with life, but also restless with motion, as tides and currents sculpted coastlines and carried nutrients across oceans. Shallow inland seas stretched deep into the continents, creating environments where land and water blurred into one another. These seas teemed with fish, ammonites, marine reptiles, and endless swarms of plankton that painted the waters green. Waves broke gently upon sandy shores where dinosaurs wandered to drink, leaving footprints that would harden into stone and survive for millions of years. Storms swept across these seas, stirring the waters and reshaping coasts. Yet in their wake came renewal. For each disturbance redistributed nutrients that fueled new blooms of life beneath the surface. Light filtered down in shafts that illuminated reefs and seagrasses swaying in rhythm with the tides. Schools of fish moved as one, shimmering silver as predators chased them through the water. Giant turtles glided slowly, their shells catching glimmers of sunlight, while mosasaurs cut through the depths with power and grace. The seabed was alive with clams, crabs, and starfish, their movements subtle but essential to the cycles of life. The warmth of these waters allowed life to thrive in abundance, creating marine ecosystems as complex and layered as any forest upon land. At dusk, the seas turned golden under the fading sun, the surface reflecting skies painted in red and orange. Pterosaurs skimmed low across the waves, their shadows gliding across ripples that stretched to the horizon. The sounds of surf echoed endlessly, mingling with the cries of distant animals along the shore. At night, bioluminescent plankton may have sparkled beneath the surface, glowing with an otherworldly light as the waves stirred them gently. To drift on such a sea would have been to float between two worlds, the starry expanse above and the luminous life below, each as infinite and mesmerizing as the other. The mountains of the Cretaceous rose slowly but steadily, shaped by the collision and movement of continents, their peaks forming new habitats for plants and animals. Unlike the towering, icy ranges of today, these mountains were often lush with vegetation, warmed by the greenhouse climate that extended even to higher elevations. Conifers clung to rocky slopes, while flowering plants spread through valleys and meadows carved between peaks. Rivers cascaded down their sides, feeding fertile plains and carrying sediments that enriched the lands below. These mountains stood as silent witnesses to the shifting of continents, their presence marking the slow but unstoppable power of geological time. The creatures that lived among these highlands adapted to the rugged terrain, their bodies built for climbing, gliding, or moving quickly across uneven ground. Smaller dinosaurs may have hunted among rocky outcrops, while early mammals scurried through crevices to escape predators. Birds took advantage of rising winds, launching from cliffs to soar across valleys, searching for food. Insects filled the air even at these heights, their buzzing carried on breezes that swept between ridges. Life here was abundant, though often hidden, making use of every niche that the landscape offered. The mountains echoed with thunder, their slopes drenched by rainfall that turned streams into rushing torrents. Mist rolled through valleys in the mornings, cloaking the land in a dreamlike veil. At night, stars blazed brightly above peaks unspoiled by human presence, the Milky Way stretching across skies that seemed impossibly vast. Fires sometimes sparked in dry seasons, their smoke curling into the air. But renewal always followed, green shoots pushing up through ash. These highlands were places of majesty and resilience, landscapes that tested life but also offered sanctuary, cradles of adaptation in an ever-changing world. The deserts of the Cretaceous were unlike those we know today, for even in this warm and humid era, there were still regions where rainfall was scarce, and survival demanded extraordinary resilience. Vast sand dunes stretched beneath unrelenting suns, while rocky plateaus baked in the heat of day and cooled rapidly at night. Yet, even here, life endured. Small dinosaurs scurried across dunes, leaving trails of footprints soon erased by the wind. Plants clung to survival, storing water in roots or leaves, while reptiles adapted to the extremes by burrowing beneath the surface to escape the sun's glare. These deserts were not barren voids, but places of hidden life, shaped by scarcity and adaptation. Oases dotted the arid landscapes, their waters drawing animals from miles around. Herds of herbivores gathered cautiously at their edges, while predators lurked in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. Birds and insects fluttered among the sparse greenery, their presence a reminder that even in the harshest places, ecosystems found ways to thrive. Fossil evidence suggests that sandstorms swept across these deserts, burying plants and animals suddenly, preserving them for discovery millions of years later. These storms were both destructive and life-giving, shifting sands to reveal water or expose fertile ground at night. The desert transformed into a cooler world, the heat of day dissipating beneath a blanket of stars. The silence was broken only by the rustle of creatures emerging from burrows or the distant calls of animals searching for water. Moonlight cast silver shadows across dunes, while cool winds whispered through dry grasses. For those who lived here, survival required patience, endurance, and the ability to endure extremes. To imagine such a desert is to picture both harshness and beauty, a reminder that even in scarcity, life finds a way to write its story upon the land. The polar regions of the Cretaceous were places of wonder, forests thriving where today only ice and snow stretch endlessly. Summers brought long days of sunlight when the sun barely dipped below the horizon, bathing the land in a golden glow for weeks on end. During this time, plants flourished, their growth rapid and exuberant, feeding dinosaurs that migrated or lived year-round in these high latitudes. Winters brought long months of darkness, when the sun vanished below the horizon, yet the climate remained mild compared to modern polar extremes, though challenging. These conditions fostered unique adaptations in the creatures that called these regions home. Dinosaurs, like hadrosaurs, and small theropods have left fossil evidence in these regions, suggesting they may have lived in herds, enduring the months of twilight by moving together in search of food. Some may have slowed their activity during the darkest seasons, conserving energy until sunlight returned. The forests were composed of hardy conifers, ginkgos, and ferns, plants capable of surviving months without direct sunlight. Insects, amphibians, and smaller reptiles also lived here, their presence proving that life could adapt even to prolonged darkness. Fossils of polar dinosaurs remind us that cold, lightless winters did not exclude reptilian life, but instead shaped unique ecosystems unlike any others on Earth. At night, during the long polar summer, the forests would have glowed under endless twilight, the horizon painted in shades of pink and gold, while stars appeared faintly overhead. Herds of dinosaurs moved silently among the trees, their silhouettes dark against the glowing sky. Rivers and lakes shimmered with reflections of eternal sunset. In the winter months, auroras may have danced across the heavens, ribbons of green and purple light, painting the night in colors unfamiliar to most of Earth's surface. These polar landscapes were dreamlike realms, blending light and shadow, abundance and scarcity, offering a vision of Earth both strange and beautiful on the plains of the Cretaceous. Vast herds of dinosaurs grazed beneath the warm sun, their movements shaping the land as they trampled grasses and ferns beneath their massive feet. These plains stretched far across continents, broken only by rivers that wound lazily through fertile valleys. Imagine the sound of deep calls echoing across the land as herds of hadrosaurs moved together, their duck-billed mouths stripping leaves from plants, their young staying close within the safety of the group. Predators lurked at the edges, watching carefully, waiting for the right moment to strike. But balance prevailed as both hunter and hunted played their roles in the circle of life. Dust hung in the air, stirred by the footsteps of giants, while insects buzzed in swarms above the ground. It was a place where life surged in abundance, a reminder of the interconnectedness that defined the Cretaceous age. These plains changed with the seasons, though the shifts were subtler than in our modern world. Rainfall would swell the rivers, feeding the grasses and plants, while dry periods left cracked earth and thirsty creatures gathering near the last watering holes. Yet, even in these challenging times, life persisted, adapting to the cycles that governed the land. Herds would migrate, following routes that had been carved into instinct over countless generations, their paths marked by footprints pressed deep into the soil. Carnivores, like tyrannosaurs and dromaeosaurs, followed these herds, moving with them across the land, their survival dependent on the abundance of prey. Each season wrote a new story across these plains, one of resilience, endurance, and the unbroken rhythm of existence. To witness such a scene would have been to feel the heartbeat of Earth itself, steady and eternal. The horizon stretched endlessly, broken only by the silhouettes of dinosaurs against the setting sun. The air carried the scent of plants and the earthy fragrance of damp soil after rain. The sounds of the Cretaceous plains were a blend of calls, footsteps, rushing water, and the distant rumble of approaching storms. At night, the stars glimmered in skies untouched by human lights, their brilliance illuminating the shadows of the land below. For those who imagine these scenes while resting, the plains offer a sense of peace, vastness, and a reminder of how small and fleeting our own place in history truly is. Swamps and wetlands thrived during the Cretaceous, forming ecosystems of extraordinary richness and diversity. In these damp, waterlogged regions, trees rose from dark soils, their roots submerged, while ferns and reeds grew thick along the edges of still ponds. Crocodiles lounged, their eyes just above the surface, waiting patiently for prey to wander near. Turtles basked in the sun, while dragonflies skimmed across the water, their wings flashing in the light. Amphibians croaked from the shadows, adding their voices to the chorus of life that filled these wetlands. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of damp earth and vegetation, creating an environment both fertile and teeming with creatures of every kind. Dinosaurs also found sanctuary in these swamps. Smaller species darted among the reeds, feeding on insects and plants, while larger ones ventured into the shallows, their heavy feet stirring mud as they searched for food. The wetlands were also nesting grounds for many species, offering safety in the tangled growth and proximity to water. Birds flitted above, their wings flashing in the sun, while pterosaurs occasionally dipped low, scanning for fish or small prey. This was a world where the boundary between land and water blurred, creating a habitat rich with opportunity for life in every form. From the smallest insect to the mightiest reptile, all played their part in maintaining the balance of this thriving ecosystem. The swamps were not just habitats, they were also engines of transformation. Layers of plant matter sank into the water, preserved in the oxygen-poor environment, slowly turning into the rich deposits of coal and organic material that scientists discover millions of years later. Storms swept across these regions, flooding rivers and reshaping landscapes. But life adapted, returning quickly after each disturbance. The constant cycles of growth, decay, and renewal gave the wetlands a timeless rhythm, one that echoed through ages. As night fell, mist often rose from the waters, shrouding the land in mystery and silence. For anyone imagining this world before sleep, the swamps invite visions of calm waters, gentle breezes, and the eternal patience of nature at work. Coastal regions during the Cretaceous were vibrant frontiers where land met sea in spectacular displays of life and activity. Sandy beaches stretched along vast inland seas, their shores marked by the footprints of dinosaurs that came to drink or nest. Pterosaurs soared overhead, swooping down to snatch fish from the surf, while crabs scuttled along the sand, leaving trails behind them. The tides rose and fell in steady cycles, revealing tidal flats rich with shellfish, mollusks, and small creatures waiting for the return of water. Salt marshes grew thick with grasses, providing feeding grounds for herbivores and hiding places for predators. The meeting of land and sea created endless opportunities for life, making these coastlines some of the most dynamic environments of the era. The sounds of the Cretaceous coastlines were a symphony of waves, bird calls, and the distant cries of giant reptiles. Seashells clinked together in the surf, while the air was heavy with the smell of salt and life carried on the wind. Dinosaurs, like hadrosaurs, sometimes ventured near these shores, feeding on plants that grew along the water's edge, while predators followed their shadows cast against the sand. Storms brewed offshore, rolling in with thunder and sheets of rain, reshaping dunes and carrying nutrients inland. Every day brought change, and every tide left behind new treasures and challenges for the creatures who called this place home. Nesting was common along these coasts. Both pterosaurs and certain dinosaurs laid eggs in sandy stretches, relying on the sun and the heat of the earth to incubate their offspring. Fossilized nests reveal the dedication of parents who guarded their young in these vulnerable spaces, standing watch against predators. The cycle of life unfolded in these sandy arenas, written in the patterns of tracks and the remains of shells left behind. As the sun set over the ancient seas, golden light spread across the water, and the coastlines shimmered with beauty and vitality. For those drifting into rest, imagining the coastlines of the Cretaceous is like standing at the edge of eternity, where the waves whisper the secrets of a world long gone. Volcanoes were a powerful force shaping the world during the Cretaceous, their eruptions sculpting landscapes and feeding life in ways both destructive and creative. Great plumes of ash sometimes rose high into the skies, spreading across continents and changing climates for months at a time. Rivers of molten rock flowed down mountainsides, consuming forests in their path, but leaving behind rich, fertile soils that gave rise to new life. In the aftermath of eruptions, ecosystems regenerated quickly, plants sprouting in the cracks of cooling lava, animals returning to graze, and insects buzzing once again over the reborn land. The cycle of destruction and renewal was a constant theme, reminding us that even in a world of abundance, change was inevitable. The volcanic regions were often dramatic landscapes, with towering peaks silhouetted against the horizon, their slopes streaked with ancient flows of rock. Geysers and hot springs bubbled at the surface, releasing steam and minerals into the air. Dinosaurs roamed these regions too, adapting to the challenges and opportunities they presented. Fossils preserved in volcanic ash reveal remarkable details of creatures caught in sudden moments, their bodies frozen in time by the speed of disaster. These eruptions reshaped rivers, altered coastlines, and influenced weather patterns, making volcanoes both feared and respected forces in the natural world. Yet, volcanoes also supported life in unique ways. Their eruptions added nutrients to the soil, encouraging lush growth in the years that followed. Their ash sometimes created new lakes, trapping water and forming habitats where fish, amphibians, and plants could thrive. They were reminders of the Earth's restless interior, always shifting, always reshaping the surface. At night, the glow of molten rock could light up the skies, casting an eerie beauty over the land. For us imagining these ancient times, volcanoes are symbols of Earth's eternal energy, a reminder that the ground beneath us is alive, always moving, always creating. Rivers in the Cretaceous carved paths through forests, plains, and mountains, forming lifelines for countless creatures who depended on their waters. Wide and slow in some regions, fast and roaring in others, they connected ecosystems and spread nutrients far and wide. Along their banks, dinosaurs gathered to drink, their reflections rippling across the surface. Crocodiles lurked in the shallows, fish darted below, and insects hovered above, creating a vibrant and interconnected web of life. These rivers were not only sources of water, but also highways, guiding migrations and offering passage through the land. To stand beside one would have been to feel the pulse of the world itself, steady and unending. The floodplains created by these rivers were among the most fertile places in the Cretaceous, rich with grasses, flowering plants, and towering trees. Herds gathered here during dry periods, and predators followed, creating scenes of both abundance and tension. The riverbanks often reveal tracks pressed deep into the mud, telling silent stories of who had come to drink, to hunt, or to rest. Seasonal floods reshaped these landscapes, leaving behind new soil and new opportunities for growth. The endless cycle of flow and renewal was mirrored in the lives of those who depended on the waters. The rivers also connected to the great inland seas, carrying nutrients and sediments that fed marine ecosystems. Their deltas spread out in intricate webs, home to countless birds, reptiles, and amphibians. Life at every level thrived in and around these rivers, from microscopic organisms to the largest dinosaurs. At night, the waters reflected starlight, shimmering like liquid silver, while the sounds of frogs, insects, and distant calls filled the air. For anyone picturing this world as they drift toward sleep, the rivers offer calm, steady imagery, like the lullaby of water that has flowed through Earth's story for millions of years. Mountains during the Cretaceous rose in jagged chains, pushed upward by the slow movement of Earth's plates, shaping weather and guiding rivers that carved valleys between them. Their peaks were not capped with glaciers, for the Earth was too warm, but their slopes carried forests of conifers and ferns that stretched upward toward thinner air. Dinosaurs roamed even these highlands, adapted to the cooler, breezier conditions, while flocks of early birds darted through narrow passes. Winds howled against the stone, scattering seeds far from their source, ensuring that life spread to even the most rugged regions. These mountains were reminders of Earth's power, of the unrelenting forces that pushed and folded the crust to create landscapes of breathtaking scale. The valleys between these mountains were rich and sheltered, catching rainfall and channeling streams that fed fertile soil. Flowering plants began to creep upward here, too, painting bursts of color against the greens of older forests. Small mammals scurried in the underbrush, finding food and safety among the rocks, while lizards sunned themselves on warm stone. Predators stalked the highlands as well, agile hunters who used the terrain to their advantage. The mountains were not barriers, but crossroads, linking ecosystems across great distances, their passes offering routes for migration and exploration. Life filled every crevice, every slope, adapting and thriving in ways both small and grand. At night, the mountain skies glowed with stars that seemed brighter than anywhere else, unchallenged by haze or human light. The calls of nocturnal creatures echoed between peaks, while streams tumbled downward in a steady, calming rhythm. The air was cooler here, the breezes constant, carrying the scents of pine and soil. For those imagining the Cretaceous before drifting into sleep, the mountains invite a sense of peace and strength, reminding us that Earth's foundations are vast, eternal, and always in motion. Deserts also existed in the Cretaceous, though they were different from many of the deserts we know today. Instead of icy nights and scorching days, these ancient deserts were warmer overall, their sands shaped by winds that swept endlessly across the land. Dunes rose and fell like ocean waves, stretching toward horizons with little sign of water. Yet even here, life found ways to endure. Dinosaurs left tracks across the shifting sands, insects burrowed deep to escape the heat, and hardy plants clung to survival where groundwater rose close enough to nourish them. The silence of these deserts was vast, broken only by the whispers of the wind. Some deserts supported oases, green islands, where life gathered around precious water. Palms and ferns grew thickly here, creating shaded refuges for creatures that could not survive long under the relentless sun. Small mammals emerged cautiously to drink. Birds fluttered among the leaves, and predators watched from the edges, drawn by the promise of prey. Even giant dinosaurs might appear, moving slowly to drink before returning to the open sands. These oases were lifelines, reminders that survival in harsh places was possible through adaptation, persistence, and the cycles of water that sustained all living things. The desert nights revealed a sky filled with brilliance. Stars scattered like jewels across endless black. Cool air replaced the day's warmth, carrying the faint rustle of creatures stirring in the darkness. In the silence, the tracks left behind by dinosaurs and other animals told stories that the sand would soon erase. For those drifting into rest, these deserts inspire a deep sense of quiet, of stillness, and of awe at how, even in the harshest places, life writes its story. Islands dotted the seas of the Cretaceous, isolated worlds where unique ecosystems flourished, shaped by separation and time. These islands might have been volcanic in origin, rising from the sea as molten rock cooled, or they may have been remnants of continents slowly breaking apart. Each island was a miniature universe with its own forests, rivers, and creatures that adapted in ways unseen anywhere else. Dinosaurs sometimes made their way to these places, smaller forms developing as resources dictated, while birds and pterosaurs claimed the skies above. The isolation fostered innovation, encouraging the evolution of species found nowhere else on Earth. The shores of these islands were alive with activity, as waves crashed against rocks and beaches hosted nesting grounds for pterosaurs and birds. Reptiles basked in the sun, their movements slow and deliberate, while insects swarmed in the air, pollinating the plants that took root in shallow soil. Streams trickled down from high ridges, feeding small lakes where amphibians and fish thrived. The scale of life here was more intimate, more fragile, but no less rich than on the vast continents. The ecosystems of islands were delicate tapestries, easily disrupted but beautifully balanced. At night, these islands were surrounded by seas that reflected the glow of the moon. The calls of nocturnal birds echoed across the waves, while the forests whispered with unseen movements. Stars shimmered overhead, mirrored in the calm waters, creating a sense of infinite reflection. For those imagining the Cretaceous while resting, the islands invite visions of solitude, of sanctuary, and of quiet harmony between land, sea, and sky. The skies of the Cretaceous were among the most dynamic realms of the planet, filled not only with clouds and storms, but with creatures that ruled the air. Pterosaurs, some the size of small planes, glided on thermal currents, their wings stretching wide against the blue expanse. Early birds, with feathers and beaks still experimenting with design, darted among trees and soared above rivers. Insects filled the air as well, their buzzing a constant background to life below, their presence essential to pollinating the flowering plants that now thrived. The sky was not empty space. It was a bustling ecosystem, alive with motion and sound. Storms rolled across these skies, gathering strength over warm seas before sweeping across continents with lightning and rain. The water they carried nourished forests and plains, replenished rivers, and shaped the rhythms of life below. Clouds rose high and white against the sun, casting shadows across landscapes where dinosaurs grazed or hunted. Rainbows occasionally arched across the horizon, a fleeting display of color in a world already rich with life. The skies were both gentle and fierce, both nurturing and dangerous, always in flux, always commanding the attention of those who lived beneath them at sunset. The skies of the Cretaceous transformed into canvases of red, orange, and purple, colors deepened by the heavy atmosphere of the time. As darkness fell, stars and the moon dominated, unchallenged by human light, their brilliance casting silver light across forests, rivers, and oceans. For those drifting into sleep, imagining the skies of this ancient world brings calm, vastness, and a reminder of the endless cycles that connect us to a past far older than we can truly comprehend. Forests of the Cretaceous were the beating hearts of the continents. Vast expanses where towering conifers and cycads mixed with the first great spread of flowering plants. These forests were lush and green, their canopies thick and filled with life. Sunlight filtered through leaves, dappling the ground where ferns and mosses grew in abundance. The air was humid, filled with the sounds of insects, birds, and the distant calls of dinosaurs. It was here that evolution's great experiments were unfolding, with plants and animals forming relationships that would shape the future of life on Earth. Flowering plants were the newcomers in these forests, adding bursts of color and scent that attracted insects and, in turn, allowed pollination to flourish. This was the beginning of partnerships that endure to this day, the foundations of ecosystems built on cooperation as much as competition. Small mammals scurried in the underbrush, climbing trees to seek food or avoid predators. Reptiles basked in sunlit clearings, while larger dinosaurs moved carefully among the trunks, their movements slow but deliberate. Life here was dense, layered, and rich beyond measure. At night, the forests grew quieter, though not silent. The chirps of insects filled the darkness, accompanied by the rustling of creatures unseen. Fireflies, or their ancient relatives, may have flashed tiny lights among the branches, while the moonlight filtered softly through the canopy. The forests were places of both safety and danger, of shelter and mystery. For anyone imagining this world in moments of rest, the forests bring visions of shade, growth, and the eternal whisper of leaves stirred by ancient winds, shimmering mirrors of water surrounded by lush vegetation and alive with countless forms of life. Some lakes were vast and deep, their surfaces calm and glassy, reflecting the skies and forests around them. Others were small and shallow, fed by streams and rainfall, home to frogs, turtles, and swarms of insects. Fish darted below the surface, their movements flashing like silver in the sun, while dragonflies skimmed above, their wings catching the light. Dinosaurs often came to these lakes to drink, leaving trails of footprints pressed into the muddy shores, silent records of their presence that would last long after they had gone. Around these lakes, plant life grew thick and vibrant, forming habitats for creatures both large and small. Flowering plants added color and fragrance to the air, while ferns and reeds created hiding places for amphibians and small reptiles. Birds sang from branches, their calls echoing across the water, while mammals crept quietly, searching for food. Predators also haunted the edges of these lakes, waiting for the chance to strike at prey that came to drink. Each lake was a meeting ground, a crossroads where life converged in abundance, all tied to the life-giving power of water. The atmosphere around a lake carried a sense of calm, with breezes rippling the water and sunlight glinting on the waves. As night fell, the surfaces reflected the glow of the moon and stars, creating dreamlike scenes of stillness and beauty. The chorus of insects rose into the air, joined by the calls of nocturnal creatures moving in the shadows. For those imagining these ancient lakes while drifting into sleep, the vision is one of peace, reflection, and timeless beauty, as if the waters themselves whispered secrets from a distant age. Grasslands began to expand during the late Cretaceous, though they were not yet the sweeping fields of modern times. Instead, patches of early grasses mingled with ferns and flowering plants, forming open areas where herds of dinosaurs grazed under the sun. These grasslands created new opportunities, new habitats for creatures to explore and adapt to. Small mammals emerged from hiding to forage in the open, while predators stalked silently through the cover of taller plants. The land was alive with the sounds of footsteps, calls, and the constant hum of insects. The grasslands, though young, hinted at the future ecosystems that would one day dominate Earth. These open spaces were filled with motion as herds moved across them in search of food and water. Duck-billed hadrosaurs stripped plants from the ground, their young staying close for protection, while armored dinosaurs grazed steadily, their tails ready to defend against attackers. Carnivores prowled at the edges, patient and watchful, choosing moments carefully to strike. The balance of life played out in endless cycles, with every creature playing a role in the survival of the whole. The grasslands were a place of energy, growth, and ceaseless activity. At sunset, the grasslands glowed golden under fading light, their fields swaying gently in evening breezes. Night brought a hush, broken only by the calls of nocturnal hunters and the rustle of creatures moving quietly in the dark. The vast openness gave a sense of freedom, of endless horizons stretching beyond sight. For those resting in the present, imagining these grasslands of the Cretaceous brings calm, simplicity, and the feeling of standing within an endless ocean of green, carried gently by the winds of time. Cliffs and rocky outcrops were striking features in parts of the Cretaceous landscape, towering above rivers, seas, and plains. Their surfaces bore the marks of erosion, carved by wind and water into dramatic shapes. Pterosaurs nested on these cliffs, using the heights to launch into the skies, while birds found crevices for their own nests. Reptiles basked on warm rocks, their bodies soaking in heat from the sun, while insects scuttled across the surfaces, finding food and shelter in every crack. These cliffs offered safety for some and danger for others. Depending on who made the climb, the bases of cliffs often formed rich habitats, where fallen rocks created hiding places and streams pooled in shaded hollows. Dinosaurs passed below, leaving tracks in the soft earth, while plants grew in thin layers of soil along ledges. The cliffs were not barren, but alive in subtle ways, with each niche filled by life adapted to survive there. Predators sometimes stalked the bases, waiting for opportunities, while scavengers searched for remains left behind by the cycles of life and death. At dawn and dusk, the cliffs glowed with color, painted by sunlight into shades of red, gold, and violet. The sound of waves or winds against stone added a constant rhythm, steady and timeless. At night, the cliffs stood as silent guardians, silhouetted against the starry skies. For those who imagine the Cretaceous before sleep, cliffs evoke feelings of strength, resilience, and the quiet endurance of stone across millions of years. Caves formed in rocky regions of the Cretaceous offered hidden realms where life unfolded in secret. Some caves were created by water-eroding limestone, while others formed in volcanic regions where lava tubes cooled and hollowed. Inside, darkness ruled, lit only by occasional shafts of sunlight or the glow of minerals. Bats' distant ancestors may have roosted here, alongside insects, amphibians, and reptiles that thrived in the cool, sheltered environment. Caves served as sanctuaries, hiding places, and sometimes as traps, preserving fossils of creatures that wandered too far inside. Around the mouths of caves, life flourished. Mosses and ferns grew in the damp shade, while birds nested in ledges near entrances. Mammals found shelter here, avoiding predators that stalked in the open. And some dinosaurs may have used these spaces for protection or nesting. The caves were both dangerous and life-saving, a balance between safety and the unknown. Their chambers echoed with the drip of water, the rustle of movement, and the whispers of winds that wandered through their passages at night. Caves became even more mysterious, their entrances glowing faintly in moonlight, their depths hidden in shadow. For those picturing the Cretaceous before sleep, caves inspire feelings of wonder and caution, of stepping into the unknown, where time slows and silence deepens. They are reminders that even in the most hidden places, life finds a way to endure. Glaciers were absent during the Cretaceous, yet polar regions still existed, though warmer than they are today. The poles of that age were lush, with forests growing where ice now dominates, their trees stretching upward in months of endless daylight. Dinosaurs lived there too, adapted to the unique cycles of polar life, enduring long summers and equally long winters of darkness. These ancient polar forests reveal how life can thrive even in unusual conditions, finding balance where today we see only extremes. The summers brought growth and abundance. As plants used the constant daylight to flourish, herds of dinosaurs grazed among these forests, their movements shaping the land, while small mammals and reptiles scurried in the undergrowth. Birds and insects thrived in the warmth, pollinating plants and spreading seeds. Rivers and lakes filled with meltwater, feeding fertile valleys. Life surged forward, taking full advantage of the never-ending days. But winters brought darkness, months when the sun disappeared and the land rested under cold skies. Plants slowed their growth, and animals adapted, some migrating to warmer regions, others enduring the long night through stored energy and careful survival. The polar Cretaceous was not frozen, but it was challenging, a place of extremes where endurance was key. For those drifting into sleep, imagining these polar forests brings visions of endless twilight, resilience, and the mystery of life thriving at the very edges of the world. The plants themselves exhaling chemicals into a sky with a very different balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Volcanoes were more active in many regions, shaping the atmosphere with their constant outbursts, while strange conifer forests crept across landscapes where mammals, still tiny and quiet, scurried in the shadows. If you were standing there, you might not even recognize the soundscape. No bird song like you know it. No buzzing of bees, because flowers hadn't yet made their grand entrance. Instead, the calls of early reptiles, the crash of surf against unfamiliar coastlines, and the rustle of cycads in the wind. It was an Earth on the rebound. Just before the Mesozoic began, the world had been through one of its darkest hours, a mass extinction so severe that it nearly erased life. Fall together. That disaster at the end of the Paleogene period wiped out perhaps 90% of species in the oceans and a huge portion on land. The Earth was left almost emptied, and the Mesozoic was the slow rebuilding project that followed. When you think about that, it gives the whole era a different flavor. It wasn't just a random chapter of strange beasts. It was life experimenting again after catastrophe, trying new shapes, filling new roles, and discovering possibilities that had never been tried before. Imagine looking at a horizon that stretches across Pangaea's deserts. You'd see vast red landscapes baked under a hot sun, interrupted by rivers that carried life in narrow ribbons across otherwise barren expanses. The air might shimmer with heat. The plants, mostly hardy and drought-tolerant, stood scattered like lonely sentinels. But follow the rivers, and you'd find lush zones where amphibians thrived, where small reptiles darted in and out, and where the ancestors of the great dinosaurs were only just beginning to stir. The earth was wide open. Natures left vacant by extinction, and evolution moved in to fill them. Of course, talking about the Mesozoic as one thing is a bit misleading. It lasted an almost incomprehensible span of time, from about 252 million years ago to 66 million years ago. That's nearly 186 million years of change, of continents shifting, climates transforming, and species rising and falling. To put it in perspective, the entire span of recorded human history is only a few thousand years. Our species has been around for maybe 300,000 years. The Mesozoic was hundreds of millions. A time scale so long that entire mountain ranges could form and erode away within it. To walk through this age is not to stand in one place, but to ride through waves of change. Still, when most people hear Meoic, they think dinosaurs, and with good reason. This was their stage. But focusing only on them risks missing the true scale of what Earth was like, because the Mesozoic was not just the age of dinosaurs, but also the age of new oceans, of continental drift reshaping everything, of evolutionary experiments in the skies and seas, of climates that swayed between greenhouse heat and cooler stretches, of plants quietly reinventing the landscape long before mammalian forests like our own ever took root. Try to imagine what the sky looked like. Today, we're used to birds wheeling above us. But back then, the first birds were only just appearing, their feathers more primitive, their flight. The rulers of the skies for most of that time were pterosaurs, with wings stretched to across elongated fingers, some as small as sparrows, others as large as small airplanes. They would have circled over coastlines, diving for fish or scavenging along beaches, their shadows stretching across dunes. Now picture the oceans. You'd see waters alive with reptiles that had abandoned land altogether. Sleek ichthyosaurs with bodies shaped like dolphins surged after shots of fish, while long-necked plesiosaurs moved like living myths, their heads darting from the waves. In the later stretches, great mosasaurs dominated, massive lizards adapted to marine life with jaws that could swallow prey whole. The seas themselves were different, too. Coral reefs were built not just by corals, but by strange sponges and by valves. Shells, unlike any you've ever seen, lay scattered along the shores, and ammonites, spiral-shelled relatives of squid, floated by the millions. On land, the forests were dense with conifers, cycads. Imagine trees rising like pillars, their crowns spreading broad and dark, the ground littered with strange ferns and horsetails, taller than you. This was a green world, but not the familiar flowering forests, you know. Flowers hadn't yet taken hold until late in the era. So the landscapes lacked the colors and scents that now seem so natural to us. Instead, they were dominated by greens, browns, grays, and the occasional cones and seeds of gymnosperms. And into this world came the dinosaurs. At first, they were small, almost inconspicuous, competing with other reptiles for survival. But slowly, they began to spread, adapting into new forms. Some walked on 2 legs, some on 4, some mixed the two. Over time, they grew into giants like surrounds, stretching longer than buses, weighing more than any land animal before or since. Alongside them came predators, from small, agile hunters to apex giants like Allosaurus, and later the mighty Tyrannosaurus. But the Mesozoic wasn't just a tale of giants. It was also a time of subtlety, of the first mammals creeping through undergrowth, of insects adapting to new plants, of ecosystems weaving themselves into complexity. Every shift in climate or geography reshaped the balance. As continents broke apart from Pangaea into smaller land masses, isolation created diversity. The dinosaurs of one region evolved differently from those of another. Life was spreading, branching, filling the earth in ways that still echo today. Even in quiet corners, the Mesozoic left its marks. Rivers carried sediments that hardened into rocks where we now find fossils. Volcanoes left layers of ash that marked turning points. Every layer of stone from that time is a page of a story we're only now learning to read. When paleontologists brush dirt from a fossil bone, they're holding not just a piece of ancient life, but a fragment of the world itself. One that tells us how Earth looked, smelled, and sounded in that distant age. So, here we are, standing at the edge of this enormous stretch of history, ready to wander through it slowly. The Earth of the Mesozoic was not a single place, but a whole theater of change. An age where life experimented wildly, and the planet itself reshaped the rules. From deserts to swamps, from mountain ranges to shallow seas, from the first fragile steps of dinosaurs to the booming thunder of their dominance. It was a world both alien and familiar, strange yet foundational to everything that came after. And as we drift deeper into it, we'll follow those stories piece by piece. The rise of the dinosaurs, the sway of forests, the restless oceans, the skies filled with wings, the climate shifts, the slow bloom of flowers, the final catastrophe that ended it all. 'Cause to ask what Earth was like during the Mesozoic is not to get one simple picture. It's to open a long, winding journey. One that spans almost 200 million years of Earth's imagination. When people picture the age of dinosaurs, the mind usually jumps to the giants. Towering surrounds, casting shadows across entire valleys. Armored beasts clanking through forests. Predators with jaws large enough to snap bone in an instant. But the truth is, for much of their time on Earth, dinosaurs weren't solitary rulers striding across empty landscapes. They were surrounded by neighbors of every imaginable shape and size, living in ecosystems as bustling and complicated as any modern rainforest or savanna. To understand what Earth was like then, you have to look not just at the famous animals, but at the whole stage they shared. Imagine standing in a valley during the Jurassic, the air heavy with the scent of resin from conifers and the musty dampness of ferns underfoot. To your left, a herd of surrounds moves slowly, their necks swaying high above the canopy as they strip branches bare, but closer to the ground. Smaller creatures scurry between tree trunks. Some are tiny mammals, no bigger than mice, darting through the leaf litter at night, their sharp noses sniffing for insects. Others are early lizards, hugging the warmth of rocks, watching wearily for anything that might swoop or pounce. The dinosaurs were there, of course, but they were only one part of a constant negotiation of survival. On the open plains, herds of plant-eating dinosaurs gathered together, much like wildebeest do today. Their footsteps shook the earth, leaving tracks that would fossilize into the stone we now study. But they didn't have the landscape to themselves. Crocodile-like reptiles lurked in rivers and lakes, waiting for the moment a thirsty animal leaned too far toward the water. Flying above, pterosaurs rode thermals, their keen eyes scanning for fish, carrying, or perhaps the chance to pluck up something small and unlucky. And in the soil beneath it all, insects crawled, tunneling and feeding, recycling plant matter, helping the cycle of life continue in ways that rarely get noticed, but matter all the same. The Mesozoic wasn't a tidy story of one group of creatures rising while all others faded into the background. It was a crowded stage, and for a long time, dinosaurs weren't even the obvious stars. In the early Triassic, after the devastation of the Great Extinction, other reptile groups were far more dominant. The ancestors of crocodiles, called pseudodons, flourished in many forms. Some of them looked like armored tanks, while others ran quickly on two legs, filling niches that dinosaurs wouldn't claim until much later. There were also strange archosaurs with beaked faces, armored backs, and adaptations that seem almost experimental in hindsight, as if evolution was testing designs in a workshop full of prototypes. It's important to picture that early world as uncertain. The Earth was recovering, ecosystems rebuilding themselves. Dinosaurs were small, light-boned, relatively unimpressive compared to the bulkier reptiles of the time. They stayed in the background, surviving quietly until a shift in climate and environment tipped the balance in their favor. Even then, they never lived alone. Crocodile relatives continued alongside them. Amphibians held on in wet places. Mammals scurried in the dark and in the seas just beyond shorelines. The ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs reigned without challenge. One of the things that makes this era so fascinating is how interconnected everything was. When we talk about dinosaurs, it's tempting to treat them as isolated wonders, towering curiosities we admire in museums. But in their time, they were simply part of the food web, the giants that browsed on conifers' open space in forest for sunlight to reach the ground, letting ferns and smaller plants thrive. Predators that hunted those giants left carcasses behind, which scavengers picked clean. Insects carried pollen, spreading the first hints of flowering plants as the Cretaceous unfolded. Every movement, the neighbors of the dinosaurs weren't just incidental. They were vital in shaping the environment that made dinosaurs so successful. Picture a late Cretaceous wetland. Herds of hadrosaurs gather along the water's edge, their duck-billed faces dipping to graze on plants. Their calls echo across the swamp, low and resonant communication between parents and offspring. Warnings of predators, or perhaps simply social chatter. But between their legs, mammals are busy. Some are burrowers, popping in and out of tunnels. Others climb through low shrubs, their small hands grasping stems as they seek seeds or insects. Crocodiles slide quietly into the water, eyes just breaking the surface. And above it all, pterosaurs with wingspans longer than a car patrol the skies. This is no lonely kingdom. It's a crowded, layered world where everything has a place. Even the plants themselves played the role of neighbors. Early in the Mesozoic, the landscapes were dominated by plants like cycades. These trees and shrubs gave structure to the forests, but they didn't offer the same kinds of resources we associate with modern ecosystems. There were no flowers for bees to gather from, no fruits dangling to tempt mammals or birds. Yet, life found its way. Insects adapted to gymnosperms, reptiles grazed cycads, and dinosaurs browsed high branches that no other creature could reach. When flowering plants finally appeared in the Cretaceous, the entire rhythm of life changed. Flowers attracted pollinators, seeds became food for new species, and the variety of neighbors multiplied almost overnight in evolutionary terms. When you think about it, this web of neighbors is what makes the Mesozoic so much like the modern Earth. It's easy to imagine a dinosaur stomping through an empty forest, but that was never the case. Just as today no animal exists in a vacuum, every creature is surrounded by others, sharing space, competing for food, shaping and reshaping their environments. Dinosaurs had neighbors at every turn, some allies, some threats, all part of the same unfolding story. The seas during this time remind us of that balance, too. While land was the stage for dinosaurs, the oceans were a completely separate arena. Marine reptiles dominated here, their sleek bodies cutting through waves. Ammonites, with their beautiful spiral shells, floated by the millions prey for larger hunters. Fish schools darted in dense clouds, while sea urchins and crustaceans scuttled across the seafloor. It was a world as diverse and noisy as any coral reef today. And, though dinosaurs never set foot in it, their world was tied to it. Ocean currents influenced climate, coastal changes created new habitats, and the rising and falling seas shaped where land animals could live. Even insects deserve their place in this picture. They were some of the most constant companions of dinosaurs, buzzing through the air, burrowing in the soil, feeding on plants, and occasionally on each other. Dragonflies the size of hawks no longer soared as they had in earlier ages, but beetles, flies, and early relatives of butterflies flourished. They were pollinators, decomposers, and sometimes pests, always there, always shaping the way life worked, always shaping the way life worked. Dinosaurs lived in a world where the hum of insects was as steady as the sound of the wind. And then there were the mammals, too often dismissed as tiny, unimpressive creatures waiting quietly for the dinosaurs to vanish. They were, in fact, lively, adaptive neighbors. They experimented with climbing, burrowing, gliding. They developed sharper senses for the night, thriving in the hours when the great reptiles slept. Some hunted insects, others ate plants. Still others may have been opportunistic omnivores. Their size kept them out of the spotlight, but their resilience meant that when the Mesozoic finally closed with catastrophe, they were ready to step forward, standing back and looking at the whole scene. It becomes clear that the age of dinosaurs was less about one group ruling alone and more about an entire Earth busy with life. Each creature was tied to others. Each environment was filled with layers of relationships. The dinosaurs may be the ones we notice most now, but their neighbors tell us just as much about what kind of world the Mesozoic really was. It was a world of sharing, of competing, of adapting side by side. And the longer you linger in that image, the more you realize that it isn't so different from the present. We to share our world with countless neighbors, most of them unnoticed. From insects recycling the soil beneath us to birds filling the skies above, the dinosaurs lived in a world woven from countless threads, and in many ways, so do we. If you were to lay out the timeline of Earth's history on a single ribbon, the Mesozoic would stretch across it like an endless middle passage, long enough that entire civilizations could rise and fall 1,000 times within it. When people call it the age of reptiles, they're not exaggerating, though it was far more than dinosaurs alone. Reptiles in every imaginable form dominated land, sea, and sky, adapting to roles that would last for millions upon millions of years. To understand why it earned that name, you have to sit with just how long it lasted and how much change could take place within a span so vast. The story begins after the Earth had staggered through its greatest dying. The Empyrean extinction had swept the board clean, and from those empty spaces came opportunity. In the early Triassic, reptiles of many kinds began to fan out into the open niches. Some stayed small, hugging the ground. Others grew into bulky, armored forms, and some began experimenting with bipedal strides that would set the stage for dinosaurs. But in those first tens of millions of years, no single group truly dominated. It was a period of reshuffling, ecosystems reforming themselves from the ruins, and every new form seemed to test the possibilities of survival. As the Triassic wore on, certain lineages began to emerge as clear successes. Among them were the ancestors of crocodiles, robust and diverse, many walking upright on long legs, filling roles from fast predators to heavily armored plant eaters. Alongside them, early dinosaurs were small, quick, and hardly the ruling giants they would later become. In fact, if you stood on the bank of a Triassic river and looked out, you might have been more impressed by the crocodile cousins and the odd armored reptiles than by the scurrying two-legged creatures we now revere. But the world doesn't stay still. Shifts in climate, geography, and mass extinctions tilted the balance again and again. At the end of the Triassic, another wave of extinction cleared the stage of many dominant reptiles, including a great number of those crocodile relatives, leaving room for dinosaurs to step forward. And step forward they did, expanding in size, shape, and ecological role until they became the towering, thundering figures that define the Mesozoic in our imagination. From that point onward, reptiles of all stripes held sway across the globe. The land belonged largely to dinosaurs, their diversity staggering when you consider the full span of their reign. On one continent, long-necked sauropods stretched toward the highest branches. On another, horned and frilled creatures grazed across plains. Swift raptors dashed through forests, while enormous predators waited patiently in the shadows. But they were not alone. In the seas, marine reptiles grew sleek and powerful, replacing fish and sharks at the top of the food chain. And above, pterosaurs spread their membranous wings, claiming the skies long before birds had truly found their stride. It's almost dizzying to consider how long these patterns lasted. If you think about the time since humans first began building cities, you're talking about maybe 10,000 years. If you stretch back to the earliest Homo sapiens, 300,000 years, the Mesozoic spanned nearly 200 million years. Within that time, entire groups of dinosaurs appeared, thrived, and disappeared without ever brushing against the edge of human history. The reign of sauropods alone lasted tens of millions of years, longer than mammals, as a group, have yet been dominant. To the Earth, dinosaurs weren't a fleeting experiment. They were the long-term residents, the standard by which entire ecosystems were measured. And yet, calling it the age of reptiles is not to forget the quieter neighbors who never left the stage. Mammals were there, small and persistent, their story running parallel to the giants. Amphibians held on in wetlands, adapting to shrinking roles, but never quite vanishing. Insects buzzed endlessly, evolving new shapes to match the plants that were beginning to diversify. Still, it was reptiles in all their forms that set the tone. Their bodies became the architecture of ecosystems, shaping forests, plains, rivers, and coastlines through sheer presence. Think about the seas for a moment. For most of the Mesozoic, reptiles ruled them in ways fish never had. Ichthyosaurs darted like living torpedoes, some species reaching the size of buses. Plesiosaurs, with necks like serpents weaved through shafts of fish, their bodies propelled by flippers that looked almost too awkward to be effective, but carried them swiftly nonetheless. Later, mosasaurs, immense marine lizards, surged into dominance, snapping through schools of prey with jaws lined with teeth that curved backward to prevent escape. These were not side stories. For millions upon millions of years, if you wanted to picture the ocean's apex hunters, you wouldn't think of sharks or orcas. You'd think of reptiles. And in the skies, pterosaurs rose to prominence with a grace that is easy to underestimate when you look at their fossils. With wingspans that eventually stretched over 10 meters, they were some of the largest flying animals ever to exist. Some soared like modern seabirds, gliding vast distances over coastlines. Others flitted about like bats, hunting insects. They occupied niches from the tiniest aerial hunters to the grandest sky lords, and they did so for over 150 million years. Birds may have taken over eventually, but pterosaurs held the skies for far longer than birds have yet managed. On land, the sheer variety of dinosaur forms is what makes the age of reptiles such an accurate label. From armored stegosaurs with their plates and spikes, to duck-billed hadrosaurs with elaborate crests, to predatory giants like Spinosaurus that may have stalked both water and land. The creativity of evolution during this time feels almost endless. They weren't just big lizards stomping through forests. They were specialists, adapted to climates ranging from arid deserts to damp swamps, thriving on continents that were splitting and drifting apart, creating new opportunities for isolation and diversification. One way to appreciate the length of this age is to remember that the world itself transformed around them. At the start of the Mesozoic, all the continents were fused together in Panga. By the end, they had begun to resemble the arrangement we recognize today. Dinosaurs didn't simply live through this change, they adapted to it. As land masses split apart, populations became isolated, evolving into distinct species. That's why we see such different lineages in South America compared to Asia, or North America compared to Africa. The breaking of the supercontinent gave rise to new environments, and reptiles of every form responded in kind. Climate, too, shifted dramatically. In the early Triassic, the world was hot and dry, deserts sprawling across vast interiors. Later, during the Jurassic, climates grew more humid, forests spreading across much of the globe. By the Cretaceous, greenhouse conditions prevailed, sea levels high, shallow seas flooding continents and creating warm, lush environments. Through all of this, reptiles adjusted, expanded, and thrived. It's hard to think of another group of animals so flexible, so capable of molding themselves to every change the planet threw at them. It might be tempting to ask why reptiles, in particular, came to dominate in this way. The answer isn't simple. Part of it has to do with timing. They happened to survive the great extinctions when others did not. Part of it lies in their physiology, their ability to adapt to different climates, to lay eggs on land, to grow into a staggering range of sizes and forms. And part of it is simply the way evolution works, with small advantages compounding over long stretches until they reshape the entire structure of life. Once reptiles gained a foothold, their momentum carried them through epoch after epoch. But perhaps the most striking thing is that, for all their dominance, they were never static. They were never static. The Mesozoic wasn't a single frozen moment where reptiles ruled unchallenged. It was a constant dance of rise and fall, of new groups emerging and old ones fading. The armored stegosaurs of the Jurassic gave way to the horned ceratopsians of the Cretaceous. Small, agile predators in one age were replaced by towering tyrannosaurs in another. Each wave left fossils behind like bookmarks in the stone. Remind us that even in an age of apparent stability, change was always underway. When paleontologists talk about this being the age of reptiles, they're summarizing almost 200 million years of dominance of creatures that filled nearly every ecological role the planet had to offer. It's a reminder of how long the Earth has been reshaped by forces and lives we can barely comprehend on human scales. And it sets the stage for everything that followed. Because without that immense span, without the reptiles that wove themselves into every corner of land, sea, and sky, the world we live in now would not exist. If the land during the Mesozoic was busy with the sound of footsteps, calls, and rustling plants, the seas were no less alive. Only their voices carried differently beneath the waves. Life continued its experiments, shaping forms that would seem fantastic to our eyes, but were simply the norm in their own time. To imagine these oceans is to imagine a world both alien and strangely familiar, full of predators and prey, of migrations and cycles, of the ceaseless push and pull that defines every marine ecosystem. The phrase ancient seas might suggest quiet waters, but the truth is, they were anything but quiet. They were in motion, endlessly dynamic, with creatures that claimed their own kind of dominance long before mammals ever considered the shoreline. At the very beginning of the Mesozoic, after the devastation of the Paran extinction, the oceans were nearly empty. Coral reefs had collapsed. Many shellfish and fish species had been wiped away, and the water itself had been left chemically unstable for long stretches. But as the Triassic dawned, the seas slowly rebuilt themselves. New kinds of corals returned, sponges took hold, and mollusks diversified again. Chasses of fish began to recover, darting in patterns that would soon attract larger hunters. In this fresh slate of opportunity, reptiles ventured in, testing the waters not as visitors, but as residents. Among the first of these marine reptiles were the ichthyosaurs. Their ancestors likely began as land-dwelling reptiles that slowly adapted to coastal life, hunting in shallows before diving deeper and deeper until they were fully aquatic. Within a few million years, they had streamlined bodies shaped so much like dolphins that if you saw one at a distance, you might mistake it for a modern mammal. Long snouts lined with sharp teeth, enormous eyes adapted for dim underwater light, and tails that moved them forward with startling speed made them some of the most efficient predators of their age. They thrived through the Triassic and into the Jurassic, and some species grew to the size of buses, true giants of the seas. But iosaurs weren't alone. Around the same time, another group of reptiles began to adapt to aquatic life, eventually giving rise to the plesiosaurs. Unlike the sleek ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs came in different body plans. Some had long snake-like necks and small heads, ideal for darting after fish or squid with quick snaps. Others had shorter necks and larger heads with powerful jaws, better suited for taking down larger prey. All of them used their limbs, transformed into flippers, to propel themselves through the water in a motion almost like the underwater flight of sea turtles. They became some of the most iconic marine reptiles, their silhouettes instantly recognizable in fossils and reconstructions. The seas were not limited to reptiles alone. Ammonites, distant relatives of squid and octopuses, floated in vast numbers. Their coiled shells varied in size, from small spirals that could fit in your palm to massive ones nearly a meter across. They were prey for larger hunters, but also hunters themselves, using tentacles to grab smaller creatures. Their shells have become some of the most common fossils from the Mesozoic, recording not just their presence, but also the rise and fall of entire ecosystems. Their cousins, the Belemnites, resembled squid more closely, streamlined for chasing through open water. Together, ammonites and boletes filled the seas, their populations waxing and waning with the fortunes of the reptiles and fish around them. Reef ecosystems slowly re-established themselves. Instead of the coral reefs we know today, Mesozoic reefs were often built by rudest clams, strange bivalves that grew into pillars and towers, creating entire underwater landscapes. These reefs supported seashores during the Cretaceous, stretched wide where waves met land, dynamic places where ecosystems overlapped and flourished. The surf thundered against sandy beaches and rocky coasts, reshaping the shorelines with every tide. Pterosaurs wheeled above, their shadows racing across the sand, while crabs and shellfish scuttled at the edge of the waves. Sea turtles emerged from the water to lay their eggs in the warm sands, repeating an ancient ritual passed down through countless generations. The seashores were thresholds, places of constant change where the ocean met the land in endless cycles of ebb and flow. The sands themselves told stories, marked by trails of reptiles and dinosaurs that wandered to drink or feed. Inland seas left behind tidal flats where mollusks and small fish gathered, feeding birds and predators alike. Each tide reshaped the land, smoothing footprints and leaving new treasures in its wake. The shores were vibrant with sound, the crash of waves, the cries of flying reptiles, and the hiss of shifting sands carried on the wind. It was a place where abundance met impermanence, where every moment left behind traces soon washed away by water's patient hands at night. The seashores shimmered under the light of the moon, waves glowing faintly with the bioluminescence of microscopic life. Stars mirrored in the waters, creating the illusion of sky and sea as one. For those drifting into sleep, these ancient coasts bring the imagery of eternal rhythms, the lull of tides, and the comforting reminder that change itself is part of nature's song. Savannas were beginning to take shape in the late Cretaceous, open areas dotted with trees and shrubs that stretched across warm regions. Here, herds of dinosaurs roamed freely, grazing on plants that spread across the fertile soil. Tall sauropods stretched their necks to strip leaves from scattered trees, while hadrosaurs grazed on lower growth in large groups. Carnivores lurked in the shadows, waiting for the chance to strike at the vulnerable, their movements hidden by tall grasses and shrubs. The savannas were landscapes of motion, where survival required constant vigilance and adaptation. These ecosystems thrived with variety. Insects buzzed between flowers, pollinating plants and feeding small reptiles and mammals. Birds perched on tree branches, scanning the ground for prey. The soil was enriched by the passage of large herds, their footprints pressing into the earth, shaping trails that lasted for generations. Predators followed the migrations of herbivores, ensuring that no part of the savanna was ever truly still. The balance of life here was delicate but enduring, a dance of abundance and scarcity played out across vast horizons. Evenings on the savanna painted the skies in warm tones, as herds settled for the night and predators prowled under the cover of shadows. The cries of creatures carried across the open space, mingling with the rustling of leaves and grasses. For those imagining the Cretaceous, the savannas evoke feelings of openness, of freedom, and of the eternal cycles of life that unfolded across ancient Earth's endless plains. Rainforests in the Cretaceous were lush and humid, filled with dense layers of life that thrived under constant warmth and abundant rainfall. The canopies stretched high, weaving roofs of green that filtered sunlight into soft, dappled patterns below. Beneath them, countless plants fought for space, while streams trickled across mossy ground. The air was heavy with moisture, filled with the songs of insects, birds, and unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. These forests were cradles of diversity, home to plants and animals that found endless niches within the thick vegetation. Dinosaurs adapted to these rainforests as well, moving carefully through the tangled growth. Smaller species thrived here, darting between ferns and shrubs, while predators stalked silently in the shadows. Birds flitted between branches, their wings flashing in beams of sunlight, while reptiles basked on warm stones near streams. Mammals crept quietly, using the dense cover to hide from danger and forage for food. The rainforest offered both safety and challenge, a place where abundance came with the constant pressure of survival. Nights in the rainforest carried their own music, with the calls of frogs, insects, and nocturnal creatures rising together in a chorus that echoed through the trees. Moonlight filtered faintly through the canopy, casting patterns across the forest floor. For those resting today, imagining these ancient rainforests evokes feelings of mystery, calm, and immersion in the timeless hum of life, thriving in every corner. volcanic islands dotted the Cretaceous seas, their jagged peaks rising from the water as reminders of Earth's fiery core. Some were freshly born, their slopes black with cooling lava, while others had grown lush with forests and meadows that took root in fertile soils. Birds and pterosaurs circled above these islands, while reptiles and small dinosaurs adapted to the isolation, developing unique forms suited only to their volcanic homes. These islands were laboratories of evolution, filled with creatures and plants found nowhere else. The shores of volcanic islands often glowed with color as coral reefs grew around them, buzzing with fish, mollusks, and predators. Streams carried minerals from volcanic slopes into the seas, nourishing marine life in hidden ways. Inland, forests of ferns and flowering plants spread quickly across volcanic soil, thriving in its richness. The air often carried the scent of smoke and ash, reminders of the restless forces beneath the surface. Life and danger coexisted here in constant balance. At night, glowing lava could sometimes be seen spilling down slopes, casting an eerie red against the dark sky. Stars sparkled above, mirrored by the gentle movement of waves around the island's shores. For those imagining the Cretaceous before sleep, volcanic islands are visions of beauty and power, of solitude and transformation, and of Earth's endless ability to create and renew. Marshes were another vital habitat of the Cretaceous, places where water lingered across wide, shallow expanses. Reeds and grasses grew tall here, forming shelter for countless small animals and insects. Amphibians thrived in the damp conditions, their calls rising into the air, while birds fed on fish and insects that swarmed in abundance. The marshes were alive with constant sound and motion, a mosaic of shallow pools, mud, and vegetation that supported diverse webs of life. Dinosaurs ventured into these marshes as well, their feet sinking into soft mud, leaving tracks that hardened and fossilized into history. Herbivores fed on plants along the edges, while predators lurked in shallows, waiting for unsuspecting prey. Turtles basked on mud banks, while crocodiles slid silently into the water, their presence betrayed only by ripples. The marshes were rich but treacherous, places where opportunity and risk coexisted in every step. As dusk fell, the marshes shimmered with reflections of fading light, the waters glowing gold and silver under the skies. Night brought mists that rose from the wet earth, wrapping the land in mystery. The sounds of frogs and insects continued, blending into a lullaby of ancient rhythms. For those drifting into sleep, marshes conjure visions of still waters, hidden movements, and the gentle persistence of life in places where land and water become one. As our journey through the Cretaceous draws to a close, we leave behind the forests, the oceans, the plains, and the skies of an ancient Earth. The creatures that lived here, from the smallest insects to the largest dinosaurs, have long since passed, yet their traces remain etched into stone and memory, whispering stories to those willing to listen. What we've explored tonight is not just a world that was, but a reminder of the planet's endless cycles of change, growth, and renewal. In the silence of deep time, we find perspective. We see that our world is ever changing, ever evolving, and always alive with possibility. The seas that once covered continents The rainforests that once stretched unbroken, and the stars that once watched over creatures now vanished, all speak of Earth's continuity and resilience. To rest with these thoughts is to remember that we too are part of this unfolding history, carried gently forward by the same forces that shaped the Cretaceous world as you drift toward sleep. Let the echoes of ancient oceans and the rustle of primeval forests linger in your mind. May they bring you calm, comfort, and a sense of timeless belonging to the earth we share. Thank you for joining this journey through deep time. This is Earth Analyst, wishing you peace, rest, and dreams as vast as the history of our planet. Good night. Good night.